Hi kids, it's Erik with another scientist interview for you. Today we're interviewing Mackie O'Hara. She's a PhD candidate in anthropology at Ohio State University. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good, good. We've interviewed quite a few scientists now, and it seems to be that there's a standard thing going on. So let's see if it comes up again. I'll ask you at the end if you know what it is. So I'll start with my first question. What does an anthropologist research?
So an anthropologist is someone who studies humans. So if you know kind of Greek, there's two parts of the word anthropology. There's anthro and then there's pology. And pology is the study of, right? And anthro means human in Greek. So anthropology means the study of humans in its broadest definition. So anthropologists study everything that makes humans humans. So it's what do humans look like? What is their physical form? What is their biology? What is their culture? What is their history? How is their language? All of that kind of gets covered under anthropology, which is really cool because basically anything that you do or that you've ever heard of can be anthropology in one way or the other. So what I study particularly is I'm a biological anthropologist, an evolutionary anthropologist, and a dental anthropologist. So breaking that down, right? So the first one I said is biology, a biological anthropologist, which means that I study the physical form of humans. So that is the body itself. And then I also am an evolutionary anthropologist, which means I study the evolution, which is the change over time of that body across human history. And specifically, I study dental anthropology, which is teeth. So I focus on teeth in order to understand the form and the history of humans over a long period of time. And I study for about the last 2 million years of human evolution.
I do have a question. How did you work your way towards dental anthropology? Because it doesn't seem like something you would think about growing up. Maybe you did. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's not something that I knew about as a kid at all. It was honestly taking a whole bunch of classes in college, and in each class I kind of wanted to go further back in time and further back in the history and find out the origins. So I started in like art history, and then I moved to philosophy and history, and each time I wanted to know the earlier origins. And then I finally took a class on human evolution and realized like, okay, this is what I've been trying to find. This is what I'm really interested in. And the person who taught it happened to be a dental anthropologist. And pretty much, I think every dental anthropologist will tell you that once they heard about dental anthropology and they started to find out how cool teeth were, it was all over, because teeth are just the best and they can tell you so much information on so many different levels and so many different parts of human life that once you get into dental anthropology, you really get stuck. So yeah, I did not grow up thinking I'd be a dental anthropologist, but teeth are super cool.
It also seems to be part of the field that is growing right now. Like when I read a lot of science publications, you actually see it in the publications right now. It's a big expanding part of the field, which is really interesting. And of course, it's the only part of the skull skeleton that you can see, right?
Yep.
On the outside. So it has a lot to do with the way people live their lives, like you said, right? You can tell if they took care of themselves, you can tell what they ate, you can tell how old they are. Could you tell us a little bit about the way anthropologists are using teeth and teeth enamel right now to research and then actually discover about people from the past?
Yeah, so there are hundreds of different studies that you can do with teeth. Basically, you can look at teeth in order to understand things like ancestry. You can look at things for wear and diet to figure out like how worn the teeth are, how they were used during life, who was eating what, and how that whatever food they were eating was kind of chipping away at their teeth, literally. One thing that I also do is I study primates like monkeys and apes, and I study their teeth in order to compare them to ours. So I look at the shape of the teeth in monkeys because that's closely tied to the diet that they eat, and then I compare that to our fossil ancestors. You can also look at the internal structure of the enamel. So if you take a tooth and you cut it open with a really fancy saw, which is sometimes what I do, inside you can see essentially what are tree rings, but inside your teeth, that show you the day-by-day growth that your teeth are making. So if you are still erupting teeth, if you still have some baby teeth, or you're waiting for a couple more teeth to come in, then inside your jaws, your teeth are recording every single day of your life. And so one of the things that I really like to do is to look at ancient teeth, but also modern teeth that people donate after they get them pulled out by the dentist for one reason or another. And I can find things like if you had a really bad fever, that shows up in your tooth record, or if you, like how fast you were growing, all of that shows up in your tooth forever.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
When I was looking at your profile online, I also saw that you're dealing with a more rare ancestor of ours, a hominid. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I study a couple different human ancestors. The main ones that I kind of focus on are Neanderthals, which you may have heard of, Homo erectus, which is also pretty well known, but then there's this new species and another species, Homo naledi is a really new species, and if you look behind me, my Zoom background right now is me standing at a site where this fossil Homo naledi was found in South Africa, and it was only found a few years ago. And it's a really interesting fossil because it is about the same age as Neanderthals, but whereas Neanderthals were basically as big as we are and had brains just as big as we are and everything, this Homo naledi was living at the exact same time, but was significantly smaller and had a much smaller brain, and also has lots of dental features that date to, that you would typically expect to see in a species that's about 2 million years old. And these guys were only about 200 to 300,000 years old. So it's a really interesting question as to why does this species look the way that it does when we have so many other species living on the planet at the exact same time that are biologically and physically more similar to each other and very different from this. So it's a really cool evolutionary question to figure out what parts of their environment were influencing their biology in order to get them to look the way that they did and exist in their environment the way that they did. So yeah, one of my questions is trying to figure out what that species was eating and how it compared to another species also from the same location. So if you see on my Zoom background, I'm standing on a hill, and there's another hill right there. That hill is called Swartkrans, and that is a really famous fossil site that has two other species, Australopithecus africanus and Paranthropus robustus, which date between the two of them from about 1.2 million years to about 3 million years ago. So it's really cool to me that there were human ancestors literally living in the exact same spot for so long. But the Australopithecus africanus and Paranthropus robustus are more distantly related to us than Homo naledi, but there are a lot of dental features that are really similar between them. So yeah, part of my research is trying to figure out how all of these species kind of relate to each other and how the adaptations and the shapes of their teeth that you see all relate to their diet and their evolutionary history.
Were Neanderthals the last hominid species before humans?
Yes and no. So, Neanderthals are really well identified in the fossil record until about 30,000 years ago. But there were some other groups, and we have some other fossil sites from kind of questionable hominin relatives. So we have a lot of fossils that look kind of Neanderthal-like or look like a couple different other species or groups. There's this group called the Denisovans in Asia that it's unclear how late they lasted, kind of. But one really interesting thing, and the reason that I say yes and no, is because both Neanderthals and Denisovans, we've been able to extract DNA from their fossils, and we can identify sets of DNA, like whole strings, that match Neanderthals, obviously, because we got it from them, but there are populations and people living today who have that same DNA in their own DNA, which basically means that Neanderthals and Denisovans never fully disappeared. At some point, they bred with modern humans, which is what we are, and they had offspring, and that evolutionary history continues today. So it's kind of hard to say when exactly they disappeared or if they were exactly the last ones, because their biology is still integrated into humans today.
That's actually a big question in science for many, many years, right? What happened to Neanderthals? And it's interesting because I think as we go along, science is losing some of its cultural biases that it had over many, many years, which is we can't be related to them because, they're primal. There's no way, we're so advanced, But
that's definitely something we talk about in anthropology a lot, is the bias that you come into your questions with as a scientist. So if I come in as a white female from America, I approach lots of questions differently than other scientists across the world, simply because of the way that I was raised and the way that I was educated, and the cultural history and baggage that I come with. There's also a big history of colonialism that influences science, and particularly influences evolutionary sciences and fossil studies, because there's kind of a sense of exoticism, right? So you have exoticism is like getting overly excited about things that are different and other. And so what ends up happening, and has happened for decades, is scientists from one part of the world going to another part of the world and researching and looking at fossils from that part of the world, and kind of not giving enough credit or not giving enough attention and access to those fossils from people who actually live there today. So one of the things that anthropologists are really trying to work on right now, and particularly people like me who study fossils, are really trying to make sure that everyone's accessing the fossils and everyone has an equal part at the table, to make sure that it's not just groups from one part of the world dominating the research that's happening in a totally different part of the world, because ultimately it's all the same human story, right? And so we want to make sure that everyone is included in actually telling the story that they know, and telling the story the best that they can, and the most, removing bias wherever possible by integrating and including as many different perspectives as possible.
Interesting. And another thing that just happened recently in the news was that they discovered that it wasn't our relatives. I don't remember if it was human or not, but that females also hunted, and they've discovered proof that females were also hunting, which of course was another bias. Yep. The men have to go hunt, right? Which is exchange.
That's a topic that I bring up in the classes that I teach pretty often. There's a lot of question about, okay, who were our most ancient ancestors and what did they do during the day, every day, right? And so to some extent, there's this bias that is going away slowly, but still pops up as a question to ask, was there a difference in what female human ancestors did and what male human ancestors did? So for a long time, there was this hypothesis that said there was man the hunter and woman the gatherer. And so the men went out and hunted big game and they brought back big animals, and the women came and walked around and picked berries and nuts and fruits and all of that kind of thing. And that is definitely...
They did everything else.
Yeah, they did everything.
You know, that's still the same right now.
There's this, you know, that is definitely one way that labor can be divided and one way that a group can exist, but it's not the default necessarily. So kind of one of the things you have to do in science is try to figure out if you're defaulting to expectations, and then ask yourself if that's actually a real biological default of humans, or if it's just your cultural understanding feeding into your hypothesis, which can be really hard to sort out. And sometimes it's really not obvious. Sometimes there's layers and layers of biases that
it's not just anthropology. It's a lot of different sciences have that bias. I mean, I think it's getting better over time. You know, I think I think also maybe the science is getting better because they're being, you know, in the beginning, it was kind of like a hobby that people had, right? You know, you know, so like they were like amateur. Now the science is much more professional. So,
I think that science improves when scientists are critical of themselves as well as the data that they're collecting. I think that's really important. And so I think as more and more scientists put emphasis on being critical of themselves and their science and their questions, science will improve.
Thank you for answering. We really went into it, right? Like in terms of time. Okay, so let's keep going to the kid. What is a normal day for you at work?
So there are a couple different types of days that I have. So first of all, I should say that although I study fossils and I am an evolutionary anthropologist, I am not someone who goes out and digs up fossils. That's not part of my particular set of skills. I can do it and I have done it, but it's not part of what I do regularly. And I don't rely on it in order to do my research. So when I need to look at fossils, I go to a museum where the fossils are stored, because someone else has already dug them up, and so I'm the one, and then I go in and I look at them later, because there's so much more to tell just from fossils, not just where they were dug up and when. So for human fossils, it's a little interesting because there's an international agreement that says human fossils have to stay in the country where they were dug up. So you can't, like, I can't have them mailed to me, or I can't bring them home with me or anything like that. This is part of the way to make sure that we're decolonizing science, is to make sure that people in the countries where the fossils are found have direct access to them, and that they stay there, because they don't belong to me. They belong to the people and the country where they were found. So if I want to look at fossils, I have to go to the fossils, which I think is a really good thing. And so I get to travel all over the world, which is really nice to look at fossils. There are human fossils all over the world. Just to say, I've been to China and to South Africa to see fossils, but there are fossils in Indonesia, the country of Georgia, Russia, India, France, Spain, Ethiopia, Kenya. All of these places, there are fossils spread all over the world. And there are also more fossil sites that are more than 10,000 years old in North and South America too. Those are only Homo sapien modern humans. There aren't other species in North and South America, but there are other species spread throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa too.
That really has to do with the fact that humans traveled so far, right? Right. That's because it's interesting that there's like nothing other than, you know, human fossils in North and South America. Yeah, that just means that land was like broken off.
Yep.
And at the time they were moving, which is really interesting. You know, it's another thing.
Yeah, so I have a couple different types of days. So I have days where I have to go and see the fossils, which are usually like during summers, because you have to travel. So during those days, I basically just go to museums and look at the fossils, or maybe take impressions of them or pictures of them, that kind of thing. Then I have research data days where I'm actually usually taking images of fossils that I have already, or casts, and measuring things on the images or on the little cast of the tooth. Sometimes I use microscopes for that. Sometimes I use software that helps me make the measurements on images, that kind of thing. And then the third type of day that I have is writing days. So when I'm trying to take all of the observations and all of the measurements and all of the analysis that I've done, and then summarize it and work it so that I can write a paper about it and share it with the world. Sometimes that's as a journal article, or sometimes it's like a conference that I'm going to, or sometimes it's just when I'm talking to people like you guys who are really interested. And so those are my 3 days. I have museum days, research days, and writing days.
Do you have an interesting story dealing with your career?
Let's see. Lots of cool stuff has happened. I think probably one of the coolest things that I've done is, before I started grad school, I did a field school in South Africa. And a field school is a course that's run usually by a university, and they invite people, usually undergraduates, but graduate students can go, and I think some of them accept people who aren't in school at all, to come with them to dig fossils in a place and learn how the whole process works, and to meet a whole bunch of interesting people and to see the fossils in person, which is totally different experience than just looking at pictures of them all the time. So I went to Swartkrans, which is that hill behind me, and I was able to dig and try to find fossils of Australopithecus africanus and Paranthropus robustus from about 1.5 million years ago. And I did that for about 5 weeks, and that was really cool because
Did you find anything?
So I found one little foot bone from probably a baboon. So it's a primate, but we didn't find anything super major that field season. So sometimes you go and you find amazing new fossil species like Homo-naledi, and sometimes you go and you find a whole bunch of stone tools and a whole bunch of mouse bones and not a lot else, but now you find out that there's not as much in that section of the cave.
But you're actually finding stone tools. That's amazing, actually.
Oh yeah. Stone tools are everywhere in the fossil site that I was digging at. So it's clear that hominins were there, but just no.
For a long time too. That means they find so many of them. They were living there for generations, right?
Yeah. So one of the things you can't necessarily see on this picture, but between this site, which is Homo-naledi's site, and then there's Swartkrans, there's another hill. I'm not sure if it's that way or that way on this picture, but it's Sterkfontein, which is another really important fossil site, and they all come right together. And one of the reasons we think that it's so close is that there is a little waterway that goes between the three of them. So finding the water is always really important, and you're most likely to find fossils in areas where there's water, partially because humans spend a lot of time around water, but also because it's easier to preserve fossils in environments where you can get
water.
Where you can get
mineral transfer, right? Yeah.
Mineral transfer, and you can also have like mud kind of cover a dead animal quickly. That will help preserve it. So that's why water sites are particularly nice for finding fossils.
I guess that also works with the fact that most human civilizations grow up around water, like rivers, the Fertile Crescent, and things like that.
Yeah, and that's been true for at least 3 million years, right?
We need water.
Yep.
To survive. Okay, thank you very much. So what advice would you give a child or a kid interested in becoming an anthropologist?
I think if you're interested in becoming an anthropologist or a scientist in general, one of the most important things you can do and to kind of keep in the back of your mind is that you always want to use your imagination and try to figure out what's going on around you, and to kind of think critically about whatever information is coming your way. So basically it means to be a global citizen, to be someone who is working to try to understand everything around them, what humans are doing, but also to understand the world around you as a scientific thought and question in general. So anyone with a lot of curiosity and a good critical eye for whether what's happening around them makes sense or is being presented in a logical way. So trying to be imaginative and logical and critical, those are the three real things that will help anyone become an anthropologist or a scientist in general. And those are the three things that I try to kind of focus on when I'm moving through my day as a scientist and an anthropologist.
So, if you remember, kids, I said at the beginning that there's something that scientists always say. It's not even true. It's actually something that any job really says, if you think about it. The idea is to be curious and to have a great interest in knowing the world around you. That is the one thing that every scientist says. It's true, actually. I mean, why would you go into science if you didn't want to know about the world around you and about our history, or about the world we live in, or how molecules interact with each other? You have an interest to begin with. So it's good to be interested. And that's true of every job. It's good to be interested in library science, if you're a librarian, for example. Be interested in how like a library works. Or if you are a mechanic, how a machine works, you know, or like how a car works. It's always good to be interested. And use your interest to guide your life, right?
Definitely.
Right? That's how it works. So thank you, Mackie, very much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and kids, I will try to put some links to Ohio State University and also to any anthropology sites that Miss O'Hara tells me about, if I'll put them on there. And stay tuned for the next Science Quest.